Tonight we're going to look at something different. We're looking at the Rambam in his introduction to Perek Chelek, which is the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin. We're going to start off by looking at the Mishnah, and then we're going to go through as much of the introduction of the Rambam as we can. And in a way, this is something maybe we should have done to begin with, because even we didn't get far enough in the Shar HaGemul to start to see how the Ramban deals with the Rambam, where he agrees with him on some things, he disagrees with him on other things. But the Rambam is a good place to start. So in this particular digression, we're going to look at the Rambam. Then next week it'll be Chol HaMoed, so we won't have shiur. And then the week after, we should have shiur again. I'll be back in Washington, and from there we're going to continue back in the Gemara in Yoma. I hope that everybody on Yom Kippur, that you're more able to follow the Seder Avodah in Musaf, having learned the Mishnayot. The language, of course, is very difficult, but you can more or less see the way the Paitan put together what we learned in the Mishnah about the Seder Avodah of the Kohen Gadol. And if you have a Perush, it's Od Yoter Tov. But anyway, I think it's one of the nice things that gives you some insight into reading the piyut. Anyway,
this piyut of Amitz Koar is almost ununderstandable. So and well,
that's
since it's going very fast, so there's no way to. The other one, how is it called? Atar Ponantanu, it's much that you can at least understand. But in the Beit Knesset where I was, they used Amitz Koar. Yes.
Yeah, like I say, it's I'm far from being an expert in piyut. Over the years, I've gotten better at understanding these more difficult piyutim. Even then, I really have to you have to concentrate, because what I mean is that you get a lot of words that seem unrecognizable. When you examine them more closely, if you think of what the shoresh is, then you can usually figure out more or less what he wants to say. But nowadays we have, there's translations, there's perushim, there's I don't know if I have this now, but there was some Haredi fellow who did actually a very good sort of line by line explanation.
Yes, you have to learn it. And there are many, how do you say, dimuyim, yes, and you have to know lama mitkavlim, and if it goes so quick, if it's so quick,
you can't.
They have no way to understand what's going on. Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that we do to ourselves when we read these piyutim. Like we do all these slichot, and
yes, the same with the slichot. Yes,
and the same with the slichot. So some are easier to understand than others. Like Eila Ezkara, I think is more that's generally more understandable, and some of the slichot are more understandable, and some of them are really, really, really hard. But there's certain words and certain patterns that repeat themselves. I have a critical edition of the Machzorim by Daniel Goldschmidt. So he has all the Marei Mekomot. Because almost every other word is or every other phrase is based on the pasuk. They're always manipulating psukim. Or in the case of the Seder Avodah, it's a mixture of psukim and things from the Mishnah. Actually, a lot of it's from the Mishnah.
You see, I listened to a shiur of Rabbi Zak Zatzal about the first line of the piyut Ki biyad hayotzer. It was a whole hour just to explain the first line, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful how it's explained it, but it took him a whole hour.
Yeah. So what can I say? I think it's kind of a funny thing that we do to have these piyutim, which most people don't understand, and you can't really understand them, like you say, unless you've learned them beforehand. You can't. But if you have a translation, you could follow the translation. If I don't know, I can't recommend particular translations. Like I said, there was one.
The Korn translation is very. I mean, I don't know if it's accurate, but it's a very good and very engaged and very compelling translation.
So those are all good things. I've often wondered about that, how these have persisted, because it's not just you and me that have trouble understanding them. You can imagine that in earlier generations, also most people didn't understand them. Most people, you have to be a real Talmid Chacham to really understand these. And so
I would wonder if sort of the very incantatory quality of the piyutim, or the piyut on the avodah in particular, in some sense, how can I put it? In some sense, not understanding in a way makes the incantatory quality more vivid and more compelling. And I'm wondering if that actually approximates the experience of actually being there, with sort of all this, like this, so much sensual detail and so much going on. And I'm wondering if that's maybe part of the point.
You know what? I think it's at least become part of the point. But I will also say that yes, just the way it is chanted, which is a central part of the Musaf. I think for the Chazan, it's very important that it be chanted in a very beautiful way, so that in itself is compelling. But anyway, I don't know. It's interesting. The whole thing is kind of interesting. Let's get back to what we're doing. So we're going to look here just at the first Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin, Perek Yud, Mishnah Aleph. So the beginning of the Mishnah, I assume everybody is familiar with, because it's quoted in the Sidur. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. All of Israel has a portion in the world to come. Shneimar v'yamcha kulam tzadikim le'olam yeshu eretz netzer matai masai. Netzer matai masai yudai yitpaer. So that's the beginning. And I think I explained this the other day, that the basic understanding of this Mishnah is that with your birth as a Jew, you are already deserving of a place in the world to come. That we come into this world tahor, and we come into this world in a situation, in a state where we are already zocheh, we already merit olam haba. The Mishnah then goes on to say, ve'elu she'ein lahem chelik olam haba. And most of the rest of the chapter deals with people who don't get a chelik olam haba. In other words, you start off, I think I pointed this out, this is in contrast, at least to some degree, in Christian theology, where you're born in a state of sin, and then you have to overcome that. And here, it's almost the opposite, that you're born in a pristine state, but you can do things that will lose your olam haba. You can lose it, but you start off with it. And then it goes on to say, so who doesn't get a chelek olam haba? Ha'omer en tchiyat hametim min Torah. Somebody who says that the quickening of the dead, the revival of the dead, is not from the Torah. It doesn't have a source in the Torah. Ve'ein Torah min hashamayim. Torah is not from the heavens. V'apikoros. And what an apikoros is, we're not going to get into that. The Rambam discusses that in Mishneh Torah and in other places. And Rabbi Akiva me'afa koreh b'sfarim achitzonim, etc. There are many other people who don't get, and then it goes also through different people and different peoples who were mentioned in Tanakh who lost their chelek and olam haba. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to switch over to the Rambam here, and so he has this hakdama. He says, "Re'iti ledaber kan al yisodot rabim be'amunot gdolei ha'erech ma'od." So I saw that this is I sought to speak here about the many foundations in faiths or beliefs that are of great value. So you should know, Sheba'alei Torah nechleku deotehem binyan ha'osher sheyasiga adam b'kiyum ha'mitzvot halalu asher tzivanu Hashem behem al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. So people who, the Baalei Torah, there was earlier generations of Rabbanim, had different opinions about the happiness that a person will get by fulfilling these mitzvot that God commanded us through Moshe Rabbeinu, and also the revenge that will come to us when we transgress them. Machlakot rabot ma'od, many differences of opinion. Shinui sifehem, according to the differences of their comprehension here, of their seichel, the way they understand it. So things got really messed up because there are many opinions. Right, so things have gotten so bad that you're not going to be able to find a place where these things seem to hold together. I'm going to paraphrase as I go, so it'll go a little faster. Before we go on, so just to give you one example, so we already have an example from the way the Ramban begins the Sefer the Shar HaGemul, because he brings two braitot, the one that says that on Rosh Hashanah 3 Sfarim are open, and they're the three groups of people. They're Tzadikim Gemurim, Rishayim Gemurim, and Beinonim. And then we had the second Braita that said the Shalosh Katot Liyom Hadin, which are also Tzadikim Gemurim, Rishayim Gemurim, and Beinonim. And so the first thing that the Ramban does is he differentiates that they're talking about different things. But that's his Perush. Not everybody agrees with the Ramban's Perush. Just to give you an example, and as you go, for example, to the Shar HaGemul, where the Ramban, I would say, comprehensively goes through many Mamarei Chazal and many psukim to try to put together in an orderly fashion, it gives you some idea of what the Rambam is talking about. So the Ramban, of course, came after the Rambam, and the Rambam here, in a much shorter version, is going to do something similar, where he's going to lay out what what all of these things are. So, in other words, here at the very beginning of the Mishnah, one of the questions we're going to have is, so what is Olam Haba? What does that mean? What does it mean to have a Chelek in Olam Haba? And is that the same thing as talking about Gan Eden? Is that the same thing as the Gula Latid Lavo? Is that the same thing as Yemot HaMashiach? All of these things are questions that need answering.
And the Gehenom, which you mentioned last time, where some people are. So to get to the Gehenom, even if you have to be some for 1 year, you have to get to the Olam Haba.
What? So yes, so the Rambam was going to talk about that. The Ramban goes into a lot of detail about Gehenom, and that there are different levels of Gehenom, and that he also lays it out as based on things that Chazal say that it's a physical place. So we're gonna set aside the Ramban. One of the reasons I want to go through this here in the beginning, you'll see the Rambam here lays out, before he even gets to the main topic, he's going to lay out some basic concepts. And so he starts off like this. He says, he's going to first lay out different groups of people and their approach to these basic questions before he gives his own opinion. And he says, so some people think that the Osher that you get is Gan Eden, it's the Garden of Eden. It's a place where you can eat and drink without any effort, without any physical efforts, and without any toil. There'll be nice houses that are made of gemstones, and there'll be beds of silk. And there's going to be rivers that are flowing with wine and perfumed oils, all kinds of things like that. And that the nekama that you'll get if you're over on the mitzvah, that's Gehinom. ושהוא מקום לא הט אש, שבו נשרפות הגופות, ומתאמנים בו בני אדם במיני עינויים שיערך סיפורם. And what's Gehinom? This is a fiery place where the bodies are burnt and there's suffering. People are suffering and all kinds of sufferings that countless ways of suffering. ולומדים אנשי כזו על דעה זו במאמרים רבים מדברי חכמים עליהם השלום, שמתאימים לכאורה לטענתם כולם או רובם. He says, look, the people who believe this, they'll point to different ma'amarei Chazal, they'll put different things that Chazal said to support their position. Kachniya, right, the second group of people, ma'amina v'choshevet she'osha ha'miyuchal Haim Yemot HaMashiach. Some people say that the osher that you're supposed to that is longed for, that people are expecting, that's really talking about the days of the Messiah, Mehera Yigala, who should reveal himself quickly. V'shapoto zman, and when the Mashiach comes, Yubanei Adam Kulam Melachim Tamid, all people are going to be. There'll always be kings. Their bodies will grow. They'll build the whole world eternally. The Mashiach himself, these people think, is going to live forever, just like God. The land itself is going to grow woven clothes, and it's going to grow baked bread. All kinds of things that are impossible. V'anikamahi, and what's the nikama under those, according to these people? Shlo ya'adam b'oto zman v'lo yizke l'roto, v'gam hem lomdim al kach, that the nekama is that you won't get to be there, you won't get to participate. And also, they're going to people from this kat, from this group. They learn this also based on all kinds of things that Chazal said, and psukim min hamikra hamatimim pshatehem l'tanatam miktzatan. They're confined supports from Chazal and from Tanakh. The kat shlishit choshevet ki ha'osher hamiyuchal u'tchiyat hametim. Other people say no. What we're really longing for is the revival of the dead. A person is going to be revived along with his family and his friend, his family and his relatives, and he will eat and drink. Notice when he says eat and drink, he means these people think that you're going to have a body and you're going to be eating and drinking, but you'll just have always nice things to eat and drink. And the nekama is that you're not going to live. You won't be revived. They also have their proofs. The kat revi'it choshevet she'osher shenasig b'kiyum hamitzvot hu ta'anug haguf v'hesegei ha'olam ba'olam hazeh. There are other people who say that actually what we're really going to get by keeping the mitzvot is physical gratification in this world. Kigon shefa haaretz v'ibuli hanachasim. There'll be, you'll have great things that come from the ground. It's like you'll have, all the fruits and vegetables that you need, or whatever grows from the ground. You'll have a lot of property. Your life will be excellent, right? Everything, you'll have the best of everything in this world. And we will have a kingdom. We will be sovereign, and we will rule over our enemies. And if we, the other way around, if we don't keep the mitzvot, it'll be the opposite of these things. Basically the way things are now in our time during the galut, right? Where making a living is hard, and we're under the thumb of other nations. We're not sovereign. It's the opposite. And they learn this out from things in the Torah, like we just read a couple of weeks ago, the brachot and the klalot that you say in Har Grizim and Har Eival and other places. The kat chamishit v'hem harov. Most people are in the fifth group. It's arfim kol hadvarim ha'elu kulam. They put all the ones above. They put them together. What we're expecting, what we're longing for, is that the Mashiach will come. He will revive the dead. And then we'll go into Gan Eden. And then we'll go and eat and drink in our revived bodies in Gan Eden, and we'll live there forever. So these are the five groups of people that the Rambam describes. So you'll already understand from the beginning that, of course, the Rambam doesn't accept any of these, and he has a different idea, right? But he's laying out what he sees, and he's going to get into this in a moment. This much I want to get through. That these are very simplistic notions, and they're offered by people who don't understand the sources that they're referring to, right? Because in each kat, he says they have sources from Chazal, they have sources from Tanakh. There are all kinds of sources that seem to support these different opinions. And he also, and before that, he said, there's so many different opinions about this, it's all confused. So he's giving you just a very quick overlook, at these different opinions, which are kind of all over the place, and they're not well formulated or expressed. אבל הנקודה הזו המופלאה, כלומר העולם הבא, הרי מיעוטו שתמצא מי שעלה על דעתו בכלל. So this, this wondrous thing, which is Olam Haba, only a small number of people really understand it. או שחשב בכך, או שנתבונן ביסוד הזה, או ששאל על אלו שמות על מה הם נאמרים. Only a very few people really have delved into this. והאם זהו תכלית, is Olam Haba the tachlit? Is that the final goal? Or achat me'elu hashkafot hakadmot hi tachlit, or maybe one of these other outlooks that we brought, maybe that's the real tachlit. V'yavdil ben tachlit ben siba mebi'al tachlit. They'll differentiate between what the tachlit is and what the circumstance or what the reason that brought about the tachlit is. But we don't find anybody who really asks this question or talks about it. But those, he said that people are going to ask these kinds of questions, like, so when there's Tchiyat HaMeitim, so are people going to wake up from the dead? Are they naked, or are they going to be clothed? Or are they going to get up in the clothing that they were buried in, which that were be maybe finely embroidered and decorated, and they were beautifully sewn. Or then maybe they'll just get up with some kind of clothing that just covers their body. Because when the Mashiach comes, will poor people and rich people now be equalized, or in the time of the Mashiach, will there also still be the strong and the weak? There'll all be people ask these kinds of questions all the time. And you who are now looking into this, understand from me mashal zeh. You should understand this analogy. And then essentially pay attention. Listen to everything I have to tell you. So this is the Rambam here now gives a very interesting mashal about teaching Torah to a person from the time he's a child until the time he's an adult. So the Rambam here accomplishes two things. The first thing he's going to accomplish is he's going to give you some insight into different levels of learning and understanding that will give us insight into how we need to delve into these questions about what is Olam Haba, what is Tchiyat HaMeitim, and on all of these things. And Toch Kedei is also going to give you insight about learning in general. So it's a very it's an important mashal. So he says, okay, naniach shenar tza'ir uchnas etzel mechanech l'lamdo haTorah. So let's say we have a young person, and he's brought to a teacher to teach him Torah. Learning Torah is good for this young person because it's going to make him a more whole person. It's going to bring him to what the Rambam calls shleimut, to a wholeness, which you'll only get by learning Torah. Ela but because he's a child, he doesn't really understand the value of that particular good. In other words, when you sit down a kid who's 4 or 5 years old, and you start to teach him Torah, chances are he's not going to be able to grasp why ultimately you're going to learn Torah. You learn Torah because of the inherent goodness of learning Torah, and because it's going to make you a better human being and a more whole person. So Lo Yavin Erech Torah, he's not going to understand the value of that good. And he's not going to understand what good it will do him to have this shleimut, to have this wholeness. So what do? You have to bring the teacher, and he, we assume, is more perfected, he's more whole than the child who's teaching, and you get the teacher to, to push the child to learn he'll teach the child something that's going to be interesting to him. I'm paraphrasing it, right? It's something that the kid is going to like, that's appropriate for his age. And the Yomar Lamed, and he'll say to the kid, learn, you learn, and as a prize, I'm going to give you some nuts or some dates. I'll give you a piece of sugar. Az Yilmad, and then he'll learn. Vishtadel lo la'atzem halimud, lo la'etzem halimud, lefi she'eno yodel ze'erech. So he's going to learn not for the sake of learning, not for the purpose of the learning itself, because he doesn't understand that there's an inherent goodness in learning. He's going to do it to get the treats that the teacher is offering him. So for the kid, the learning is not the main thing. The main thing is to get the treats. That's what's really good. But he understands in order to get the treats, he has to do this learning stuff. לפיכך חושב הוא את הלימוד עמל ויגיע שהוא עמל בו כדי שישיג אותה המטרה החביבה לה והיא אגוז אחד או חתיכת סוכר. So he's going to go through, he'll schlep through the learning, right? He'll suffer through the learning so that he can get his prize. וכאשר גדל, and then he'll get older. ויחזק שכלו, and he'll start to become more intelligent. He'll be, we'll leave it. And then the prizes that you offered him when he was little, now they're not so important to him. He doesn't care so much for candy. He doesn't care so much for the nuts and whatever. Now he values other things. So then, so then you're going to offer him something. You're going to bring him in by offering something that he likes now that he's older. It says, okay, now you'll learn, instead of giving you candy, I'm going to buy you nice shoes, or I'll buy you nice clothes. Right? So he's going to work to get the piece of clothing. That's the real reason why he's learning. Then he'll get older, and then those things won't mean so much to him anymore. So then you have to offer him some, you have to bring him in with something more. Or something more appropriate for his age. Learn this, and I'll give you money. וגם אז ילמד וישתדל כדי לקבל אותן המעות, and he'll learn just to get the money. וקבלת המעות אצלו יותר נכבד מן הלימוד. But the money is still more honorable to him. It's more important to him than the learning. לפי שתכלית הלימוד אצלו, אז הוא קבלת המעות שהובטחו לו. Right? Because the main reason he's learning is still to get the money. כאשר יהיה בהכרה יותר, ויהיה קל בעיניו גם דבר זה, וידע שהוא דבר פחות ערך, and when he understands that money is really worth so much, משדלים אותו במה שהוא יותר חשוב מזה, ואומרים לו למד כדי שתהיה רב. v'dayan, yichabducha b'nei adam, v'yamdu mipenecha, v'yekaymu dvarecha, v'yigdal shimcha b'chayecha, v'yachar motcha, k'mo ploni u'ploni. He says, now, he says, okay, look, if you learn now, I'll give you a title. You can become a rabbi, or you can become a judge, and people will honor you, and you'll be respected in this while you're alive, and even after you're dead, like so and so. And then then he'll learn in order to get that honor, right? To get that level of honor. Right? So all of this is really terrible. This is all sort of despicable. But you need to do this because people are kalei dat, right? They're lightheaded. In other words, they don't always understand the seriousness of what they're doing. Kalud dat hadam she'oseh tachlit halimud davar acher chutz min halimud. They make the purpose of their learning something that's not the learning itself, right? So when you're very young, so essentially you go through this as the person gets older, you go through this list of material things, ending with the title, which even though it's not physical, but it's also kind of a material thing, and it's not the learning itself. You don't do it for the learning itself. You're doing it so people will call you rabbi. Yoma, you'll say, why am I learning all this stuff except just to get to this hazaya? And here I was not sure exactly how to translate the hazaya. By the way, the Rambam, I think I've mentioned this before, this was all written in Judeo-Arabic, and depending on, this is Rav Kapach's translation. And I looked to see if he had a note about this hazaya, but the idea is like, anyway, I'm learning just to get to this, to this delusion I have of being something greater. So this is what Chazal meant when they talked about learning shelo lishma, not for its own sake. It means you're fulfilling the commandments. It's when you're learning for a purpose other than the mitzvah itself, or not just learning. This is true of any mitzvah. Any mitzvah that's shelo lishma, it means you're not doing it for the sake of the mitzvah itself. Right, so Chachamim in Avot, they say about mitzvot, you don't make them a crown to make yourself great by, and you don't make them a kardom, an axe to dig with them. You don't use them as a tool. You don't use them to glorify yourself, and you don't use them as a tool. Ramzin, and so they're hinting here, they're alluding to this idea, the Mashabiartilcha, Shelo Yaseh Tachlit Halimud, Lo Sheyachabdu B'nei Adam V'lo Rechishat Mamon. What they mean by these examples of Atara and Kardom is that you don't learn in order that people give you honor, and you don't learn in order to gain financially, to gain materially. You don't make the Torah of God your living. The only purpose of learning is to learn, is to know God through learning. The purpose of truth is to know the truth. Mitzvot emet, and the mitzvot are truth. The establishment of them, their existence, is their tachlit, is their final goal. You're not allowed to say, okay, so if I do the mitzvah, then I don't do it averot. What am I going to get for it? What is God going to compensate me for? This is like it goes back to the analogy. This is like the little kid who's saying, so if I learn, what are you going to give me? So I'll say a certain thing. לפי שכאשר ראינו חוסר דעתו שאינו מבין ערך הדבר הזה, ולקש לתכלית תכלית, נענה לו לפי ערך שכלותו, אינה כסיל כיבלתו. Right, that's a pasuk. He says, okay, look, so for the child, you respond in kind. So we understand that the child is not yet mature enough and intelligent enough to understand the purpose of his learning. So you can respond in kind. You say, you can learn so I can give you something. And that's this idea. And make sil kivloto. You reply to a fool according to his foolishness. Chachamim also warned us about this. Nobody should make the purpose of their learning or their fulfillment of mitzvot a particular thing. And this is the famous Mamar of Antignos Ish Socho, who said, Al tiyu kavadim mishamshim et harav al manat lekabel pras, ela hiyu kavadim mishamshim et harav al manat shelo lekabel pras. This is a particular girsa in the Mishnah. The way we have it is slightly different, but this is a famous Mishnah, right? You're supposed to be like the servant who serves the Don't be like the servant who serves the master in order to get a prize. You should be like the servant who serves the master. Here he says al manat shelo lekabel pras, in order not to get a prize. The way the girsa we have is a little bit different. It says mishamshim et harav shelo al manat lekabel pras, not in order to get the pras. It's a slightly different thing, but basically the same. But what does he mean by this? Ratzu bekach la'amin be'emet le'etzim ha'emet. The idea is you're supposed to believe. You should truly believe in the inherent truth. Somebody who does the mitzvot and learns just in order to acquire truth, to get truth, this is the person who serves God from love. Right, there's a pasuk, right, that he desires his mitzvot much. Amar Rabbi Elazar b'mitzvotav v'lo b'schar mitzvotav. That the desire is that God wants you to desire his mitzvot, but not the reward for the mitzvot. So this is we're going to go on in a second, but just to make the point here that I think you all understand. So we talk about this idea of gumul, and we understand that there are these things. There's Olam Haba, and there's Yimot HaMashiach, and all, whatever it is, all these different ideas of schar. But the Rambam here lays down a very important yesod, which is to begin with, that's not the point. Getting your schar is not the point. The point is, you do the mitzvot for the sake of doing mitzvot. You learn for the sake of learning. That's the real tachlit. The kama gedola raya zu the kama brurahi shazu raya brura mashi ikdamnu bidvarenu. So this is a great proof for what we set out earlier. Yoter gadol mize amram b'lashon sifrei. Even more than that, it says in the sifrei. Shem tomar hareni lamed Torah bishvil sheyeh ashir, bishvil shekra rabbi, bishvil she'akabel sachar b'olam haba. Maybe you'll say, I'm going to learn Torah so that I'll be rich, or that they'll call me Rebbe, or because I'm going to get a great reward in the world to come, right? Not even in this world. You'll say, I'm going to learn, I'll live a poor life now, but I'll get a sachar in the world to come. Talmud lomar la'ahavat Hashem. Everything that you do from love. הנני יתבאר זה העניין ונתברר שהוא מטרת המצוות ויסוד אמונת חכמים, ולא יתעלם ממנו אלא שכר ופתי. In other words, this is the basis of everything. This is the basis of everything, is you do the mitzvot and you do the learning out of love, and this will not be lost on anyone except a fool or a stupid person, שכבר השליטו הזיות הדעות hashigoniyot v'dinyanot hagruot, who's already been ruined by these delusions, these delusional ideas that are crazy and these terrible things. It's alluding back to these different katot that he mentioned earlier. He says, like, people who buy into that, they're ruined, right? If they really believe that, they've ruined themselves. This is the ma'ala of Avraham Avinu, shahaya oved me'ahava. This is what was distinct about Avraham Avinu, that he was Oved Hashem from love. This is what one should aspire to. You should aspire to be like Avraham Avinu, to do everything out of love. So he understands, again, the Rambam, why is he talking about this? Because before he's not saying that that these things don't exist. There is sachar. He doesn't deny that. But from the get-go, from the very foundation of things, that's not why you do anything. The reality of the sachar is a reality, and then he's going to explain how he understands that reality. But that's not why you do anything. You do everything mitoch ahava. Chazal understood this is really hard. Not everybody can really grasp this. And even if he does grasp this, somebody who does grasp this, maybe they're not going to like this so much. It's not going to seem to him that this is really right when he first looks at this. Why? It's normal. It's the natural way of people. They do things either in order to gain something or to prevent some kind of damage, right? To protect yourself or to move forward. If you don't get something out of it, or at the very least you don't prevent something terrible happening, then people think there's no point in doing these things. This will be very hard to tell somebody who's learning Torah. You do these things not because you're afraid that God is going to punish you, and not because you hope that he's going to give you compensation. It's very hard to grasp this. It's not the way we live in the world. That's not the way our lives actually work. It's very hard to understand that everybody should try to be like Avraham Avinu. So therefore, Chazal said they gave a heter. They made it permissible. They said it's okay. They allow you to do things with the hope of getting compensation. And they allow you to keep from doing bad things because you're afraid of being punished. And we even encourage them in this way. We reinforce this idea until a person will reach a point where they will understand on a higher level, on a more complete level, what it is. The same way that we treated the child, that when he was learning, based on the based on the analogy that I gave you earlier. In other words, we're all children. We're really all children at different levels of sophistication. If you're Zoche, you'll get to the point where you understand that the whole point of keeping the Torah and keeping mitzvot is not to get to Olam Haba. It's not to, save yourself from Gehinnom. You're doing it because that's what you're supposed to do. And the Rambam emphasizes you're doing it because you're trying to attain truth. And you can only do it this way. And the fact that you'll get a reward, or you might or you'll prevent yourself from getting punishment, that's not the point. Those are real things, but that's not the point. But Chazal said, you know what? It's okay if you don't do things lishma, because the same way that the child grows, and as the child grows, they become more sophisticated, and that eventually they can reach the level of sophistication where they understand that the whole reason they're learning is to learn. And it's always been true. It's been true from the time they're a child, but it may take a long time until they understand that that's the real reason that they're learning. And that's true for all of us. And actually Chazal were makpid, like they kind of got down in this context on Antigonus Ish Socha, because he publicized to the masses what he publicized. In other words, and he'll talk about this here a little bit more, and the Rambam goes into it more in his Perush on Avot, on that Mishnah, that the Gemara says that Chazal, other Chachamim, in essence, thought that Antigonus Ish Socha made a mistake with his ma'amar, that you should serve God like a servant who doesn't. You should not serve God like a servant who serves in order to get a pras. Rather, you should serve God like a servant who doesn't do it in order to get a pras. Why? And there's a Mishnah, right? A couple of Mishnah that's in the first parak of Avot. A little later on, it says, be careful with what you say. Here, we can just take a quick look here. Oops. Am I missing this? Oof, 1 second. Here we go. I didn't go back far enough. Antigonus ish socha kibel mishimon tzaddik, hu hayomer al tiyu kavadim המשמשים את הרב על מנת לקבל פרס, אלא הבו כעבדים המשמשים את הרב שלו על מנת לקבל פרס. ויהי מרש שמיים עליהם. And then later on, it says, Avtalyona merchachamim, hizaru b'divrechem. Right? Be careful with your words. Shemet achovu chovat galut v'tiglu l'makom mayim ha'ra'im. Because maybe you'll be chayav, you'll be chayav galut, right? You'll do something that will force you into exile, and you'll be exiled to a place of bad waters. Yishtu hatalmidim haba'im acharechem v'yamutu, and then the students are going to drink the bad waters after you, and they will die. V'nimtza shem shamayim mitchalel, and then you'll see that the name of heaven has been profaned. So here the Rambam explains what's Maim Hara'im, Kinui Leminut. Maim Hara'im here is just another term for minut, for going, what would we call that? For not going in the direction of the Torah. Be careful what you say to the masses. In other words, you have to be careful so that what you say doesn't leave any doubt or any room for interpretation. Because maybe, right, so because you want to preempt people who are going to be deniers of the Torah, that they will interpret it according to their belief. And even the Talmidim that have already learned from you, maybe they will become minim. And they'll even think that that's what you believed. The Rambam explains this elsewhere. So two of the students of Antigonus Ish Soko, one was Tzadok and one is Baitus. And based on the Mishnah of Antigonus Ish Soko, they thought, this is crazy. What is it? What do you mean, be like a servant that serves God not in order to get a prize? Then what's the point of anything? If there's no ultimate reward and there's no ultimate punishment, what's the point of anything? And both Tzadok and Baitus ended up rejecting Divrei Chachamim, right? They ended up rejecting Torah Sheba'al Peh, and they became minim. So this is what the Rambam is referring to here. Back in
Shel?
Yeah.
Yes, the Rambam is quite extraordinary because we know that he didn't like machloket. He thought that there was one emet and that's it. But he is doing all the time parshanut.
It's true, but
his parshanut is the emet.
It's true. Well, listen, I think
no, it's okay. That's him. Yes, that's the Rambam.
This is the Rambam. So, but the Rambam here, yes, the Rambam. It's interesting. I'll digress on this for a moment because it's very interesting what he said. And I think we've touched on in other shiurim. When you look at the Rambam in particular, but also at the Beit Yosef, at Yosef Karo, who I think wanted to emulate the Rambam. They both of them talk about this idea that there should be one Torah and not many Torah, which is something that already, like Chazal say. Chazal talk about this idea that there shouldn't be a many Torah. So in this context that we're talking about here, the Rambam is saying you have to be, if you're teaching, you have to be super careful about what you choose to teach and how you choose to teach it. So that if you're teaching it, if you taught the way Antigonus Ish Soko taught, even though the Rambam is not saying that what he taught was wrong, he dafka agrees with it. He learned something very basic from Antigonus Ish Soko. It makes his point here. It's his point that you don't do the mitzvot in order to get a sachar. He says, but you have to be really careful how you pass that on, because people can misinterpret it. So, but the Rambam in all of his work, at least to the extent that I'm familiar with his work, he's trying to be very definite. He is trying to lay down rules and make final decisions. Agav, one of the things that's very interesting, and I've always found this fascinating with the Rambam about these particular Mishnayot that deal with Chedek L'Olam Haba, that the Rambam deals with these Mishnayot with the same methodology that he deals with halachic Mishnayot, and he paskins, because if you go through the chapter, there are differences of opinion about certain things. And the Rambam, using Chalei Psak and his understanding, he paskins like one way or the other about things which obviously none of us can really know. It's qualitatively different than halacha, because we do have an idea from Chazal that halacha is ultimately up to us. Right? That's the whole idea of lo b'shamayim hi, according to Rabbi Yeshua, that God gave it to us to decide about halacha. But the truth is, God doesn't give it to us to decide what the definition of olam haba is. We don't know. Now the Rambam will lay it out, and he's going to lay out these Shoshesrei Yisodot, right, that we sing in Yigdal. That's the basis of Yigdal. Not everybody agreed with the Rambam on all of these Yisodot and his understanding of them. But
usually the psikot are only about things you do in the world, how you should behave, and the Rambam is doing a psika about opinions. This is not the usual way of.
So I'm saying the Rambam. Yeah, but the Rambam approached this in the same way that he approached the rest of the Mishnah, the rest of the Talmud. That there's a certain way you learn, and this is how, and you come to hard, fast conclusions. In any event, I find the whole thing a fascinating idea because see what happened. So the Rambam wasn't the only person, of course, to make a Sefer Halacha. But he says explicitly that the reason he's making his Sefer Halacha is essentially to get rid of machloket, right? It's to say these are the final piskei dinim, and what happens even in his lifetime, it stirs up machloket. He's attacked. He's immediately in his lifetime. Most notably, but not only from the Ravad, right, who was the Gadol Hador in where he was in Europe, and then you have a similar thing with the Beis Yosef, with Yosef Karo. When Yosef Karo comes to write the Beit Yosef, he says, "Look, there are lots of Sifrei Halacha by now. Like this is now the 16th century. We have the Rambam, we have the Rif, we have the Rosh." And we have dozens of other piskei halacha from other collections, and including the Tur. And he says, "But you know what? I'm going to make a kind of collection of all of these works, and I'm going to tell you how to decide the halacha." So he uses the same lashon, so that there shouldn't be many Torot, right? He says now there are many Torot, and we should have one Torah. And what happens? And then based on that, he writes the Shulchan Aruch. And then what happens? Also, in his lifetime, you have people who disagree with him. You have the Ramah who immediately writes his mapa on the Shulchan Aruch, where he says that's not the way Ashkenazim paskin. This is the way Ashkenazim paskin. You have the Maharshal, Rav Shlomo Luria, who attacks the whole idea of the Shulchan Aruch. He doesn't even accept the way that the Shulchan Aruch was written. And Ad Hayom Hazeh, we have dozens, if not hundreds, of commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, and commentaries that go in all kinds of different directions. So you might say there's something inevitable about the human condition that we're not going to come to one single psak for the entire Torah. It's not really going to happen. It's more that in any given situation, even if there are many opinions, when we come to do a mitzvah, we have to paskin, right? At some point, because we are limited human beings, we don't live in multiple dimensions, so we can't do all possible outcomes. We can't do all possible options to all possible outcomes. So we do have to paskin. But the reality is the world that we live in is not going to give us one single Torah for everything. Now, if you have a Sanhedrin, in theory, you can come to something like that, but we don't have a Sanhedrin. And right now, that's our condition.
Or
Anyway,
if you are Catholic, you have the Pope who is deciding what to do.
Right. So fortunately, we're not Catholic, but yes, but yes, that's exactly. This is maybe
you have a doctrine.
You have the doctrine. You have a dogma.
Dogmas, yes.
Right. You have the dogma where you must accept it, and if the Pope says it in the context of his being the Pope, it is by definition correct and it's true. Mm-hmm. And that's not the way we do it in Judaism. It's not the way we do it. But the Rambam really tried to make a single Torah. And of course, it's a monument. His work was monumental, his Perush and the Mishnah, but especially the Mishneh Torah. It's a monumental thing that he does. But we're never going to get to a point where there really is only one truth, or at least that we can grasp. But we'll leave that discussion for another day. I want to get a little bit further on here. אבל מוטב להם בכך כדי שתקנה להם תכונה והכשרה. So he says, look, Chazal said you're allowed to do mitzvot with the idea that you will get a pras or you will be saved from punishment. ואין ההמון מפסידים לגמרי בהיותם מקיימים את המצוות מיראת העונש ותקוות השכר. You don't completely lose out. In other words, you haven't written yourself out of the Torah, as it were, if you do mitzvot because you're afraid of punishment, or if you do mitzvot because you're hoping for a reward. They're not whole. In other words, they're not complete people. It's better to do that. In other words, it's better to do the Torah shelo lishmo v'avru el hamet, and then they'll come to the truth. And ultimately, they will worship. They will do the mitzvot because of love. V'hu amram aleihem hashalom yolam yasok adam b'torah afilu shelo lishma shemito shelo lishma ba lishma. So Chazal were practical. They understood that we're not perfect human beings. It's very hard to get to this level of wholeness or perfection, where really what you're doing, you've removed any notion of schar v'onesh from your head. And you're really only doing the mitzvot in order to do the mitzvot. But that's very hard to get to. So what you do, what do they say now? They say, fake it till you make it. It's kind of the same thing. In other words, we let you do mitzvot. Chazal let you do mitzvot. They even encourage you to do mitzvot, even not for pure reasons, even if it's just for the schar v'onesh, because by doing them, by constantly being exposed to doing mitzvot, you will be in a better position to reach this level of shlemut. So we're almost at the end, and I really want to go through this, and then it's going to lead us right up to the part where he's going to go back and talk about all the things that he raised in the beginning, and we won't have time for that. But this analogy that he gives here, which I could summarize very quickly, but I'll read through it because he does this very well. This is a very important analogy. He says, look, what you need to know regarding what Chazal said, what he means is there's three groups of people in terms of how they relate to what Chazal said. And again, here he's laying the groundwork for understanding these concepts of Tchiyat HaMetim and Olam Haba and all of that. Remember that when he laid out the beginning, he said there are five groups of people, and they have this idea and that idea and this idea and that idea. Already we have an understanding that the Rambam, of course, is going to reject them because they're not going to really fit into some of the principles that he's laid out now. But remember, for all of those katot, he said they can point to this mamar chazal or that mamar chazal or this pasuk or that pasuk. They all have sources that they can point to. And so now he's going to tell you, let's talk about these sources and how people relate to them. So he says, "Akata rishona v'himrov asher nifkashti imahem v'asher ra'iti chiboreim asher shamati lehem." So there's this first cut, the first group of people. This is most of the people I've come across in real life and in terms of what other people have written and things that I've heard. Vivinim otam kifshatam. They understand these ma'amarei Chazal in their most simple sense. They don't even try to explain them. I'm paraphrasing a bit. They don't explain them. In other words, they take Ma'amarei Chazal literally. They take Chazal literally. They take all these things which are impossible, they can't possibly happen, as if they must be part of the reality. Right, so like he alluded to something like there's a Mamar Chazal that clothing is going to grow from the ground and bread is going to grow from the ground. So he says these people think that's literally what Chazal meant. Not only, even though it's clear that the Rambam, of course, was a rationalist, any rational person knows that's not going to happen. But people will take things that are completely irrational and say, no, that's part of that's absolutely a necessary existence. They only did this because they of their foolishness regarding wisdom and their distance from Madaim, which nowadays now we say sciences. I'm not sure that that's a good translation, but you mean different types of knowledge, right? They're not whole enough in their understanding that they themselves will awaken to the mistakes that they're making. They won't come to this themselves. And they haven't found anybody else who's going to wake them up to see their mistake. So they're left basically to their own devices, and they understand what Chazal say must be exactly kifshutam. It must be taken literally. You even ad kedei kach that when you tell the masses of people, if you tell these Mamarei Chazal to stun people, they'll be, they'll be shocked, like they'll be wondering, how could it be that somebody could even imagine these things are true? And they'll think that they're correct things, and certainly that this is what people like. Akata zu hamiskena rachbanut al sichlotam. Right? The Rambam here doesn't pull his punches. This wretched group of people, you should have mercy on their foolishness. They think that they have raised the Chachamim by quoting them and saying, taking these things literally. They've really lowered the Chachamim. They don't even feel it. They don't even detect it. The Chai Hashem, they're blackening out the Torah. They're making the Torah of God the opposite of what was intended. That right. So the Torah says, right, that Moshe tells the people in Dvarim, right, that people, when they hear the Torah, they'll say, Rak am chacham, right? Only a wise nation, this great nation, has the Torah. But if other people hear what the people say that the Torah says, these crazy things that they get from Chazal, people are here and they say that's nuts, like that's crazy. What these Jews are just fools. These people who darshan using these Mavarei Chazal, they themselves don't really even understand what they're saying. Who would God, make them shut up? At the very least, these people who are repeating this B'amarei Chazal, they should have just said, Ein anu yodim ma ratzu chachamim b'dvarim elu. In other words, if they really don't understand it, they should just say, we don't understand what they're trying to get here. V'lo hayech perusho. We don't really understand how to explain it. Ela choshvim she'evinu. They think that they understand it. And so they set themselves up to give this understanding to the masses, what they themselves understand, and not what Chachamim actually said. They take the drashot from brachot, from Masechet Brachot, he means, and Perek Chelek. There are many drashot in this Perek in the Gemara. They take them literally, word by word, word for word. Okay, so that's the first cut. Because we're running out of time, I really have to go. I'll just summarize the next two katot. The next cut are the people. It's also people who take what Chazal say literally, and they think it's stupid. They think it's nuts. They think it can't possibly be, and so they reject it outright. They say, look, if this is what Chazal said, if this is what the Torah means, then of course there's no truth here at all. So, and he said, like, these are even worse than the first group. The first group believes that it's all true. But they don't understand it, and they don't understand that they don't understand it. This cut, they believe that Chazal said all these things in earnest, as if it's true. And it can't possibly be true. So the whole thing must be rejected. It can't possibly be true, so there's no reason for us to have anything to do with Torah. So I'm skipping all that. So the Katash Lishit, V'heim Chai Hashem Ma'atim Ma'od. The third category, and by God, there are very few people in this category. It's really hard to even call them a kat because there's so few of them. Like, it's not really even a group. It's like you wouldn't call, the Rambam understood the Shemesh to be distinct from stars. We understand that differently now. But for the Rambam and for astronomers of his age, the sun was a distinct thing that was in the sky, that was in the heavens. So you wouldn't call it a mean, you wouldn't call it a type, because there's only one. So you're saying there's so few people who understand what I'm going to tell you now that I'm not even sure that it's a kat. Anyway, hang
So
on.
maybe the Rambam thought that there was only one, it's himself.
I don't think he really thought that there was only one, because no, I can tell you for sure.
One, like the Shemesh.
The Rambam didn't really think that he was the only one. He certainly understood that there were people who preceded him and even some of his contemporaries, I think. But he understood there were very, very few. הם האנשים שנתברא אצלם גדולת החכמים וטוב תבונתם, במה שנמצא בכלל דבריהם דברים המראים על עניינים אמיתיים מאוד. So there are people who understand actually what the brilliance. I'm not going to directly translate the brilliance of the Chachamim, and that their grasp of truth. Even though there's only a few of them, and they're scattered in different places and different things that they wrote, but they still show by what they've written their wholeness, their completeness, their perfection regarding the grasp of the truth. In other words, just to summarize, the third group are people, and this is the Rambam goes into this now. The third group are people who understand that Chachamim spoke using analogy and using metaphor. So that not everything that Chazal said is to be taken literally. It's simply not. And he's already alluded to with the first cut that I'm putting together a couple of things now. If you come to a Mamar Chazal that seems incomprehensible, right, that can't possibly be, so at least have the humility to say, I don't understand this. But at the base of that is that there is an understanding here. Chazal are trying to explain something, but they do it in using chida. They do it in using metaphor and analogy and using riddles. And why do they do that? It's because these concepts are not easily understood, and you should be already of a certain level in order to grasp them. So he introduced this idea earlier with that, what he said about Antigonus Ish Socho, who said very bluntly that you should be like the servant, right? Don't be like the servant who does the service in order to get a prize. Be like the servant who does the service not to get a prize. So that's true, but it's blunt, and it's so blunt, it's so that people can misunderstand it. Those like Sadok and Baitus who said, "Oh, if that's the case, then what are we doing this for?" And they missed the point, and so they became Sadokim and Baitus. Right? They became minim. He said so. The idea is that certain things Chazal say, they are shrouded in I don't want to say mystery, but they're put in, they're phrased in these ways as a way of limiting the understanding to people who are making the effort to understand, who will be able to understand it in its proper context and in its proper way. So, and then he goes on to say, he says, if you're from one of the first two categories of people, don't even continue, because anything I say here is just, it's not going to be matim. It's not going to work for you. But if you're among the, this other small, group of people who really wants to understand the truth, then you should continue. And then he gets to this part. He says, now I'm going to tell you what I wanted to tell you. But we understand now, okay, so we're not going to go through this. But the Rambam starts to lay out his basic understandings, and he comes back to, he's going to refer to sources that people took literally, and he's going to explain to you what they mean actually. That's really what he was getting up to. So, but he did this whole hakdama so you'll understand where he's coming from. He doesn't jump right into these explanations. He wants you to understand, first of all, that the point of learning is to learn. The point of doing mitzvot is to do mitzvot. And none of it is in order to get a prize or in order to keep yourself from getting punished. That's the foundation for everything. That's what he lays out in the beginning. The second thing is understand that there are all these sources in Chazal and in Tanakh, which if you take literally, you won't come to the truth, because that none of these things should be understood literally. You have to understand them in a higher context and as metaphor, etc. And then what he's going to do now is go through some of those specific sources and explain to you how he understands them. And Toch Kedei, then he'll explain to you how he understands Olam Haba and Gan Eden and Tchiyat HaMeitim and Yemot HaMashiach and the Geulah. He is going to explain all that, but that's where we're stopping for tonight. You're all welcome to look at this again. It's in. I didn't look, and I could be that this is also translated, if you prefer the translation. And I made a mistake. I thought that Shar Hagmul was translated on Safaria, but I looked, and they only translate like the first few paragraphs. So I don't know that there's an actual translation that that's been published. I don't know if this is translated. I would look on the Safaria website and click the English thing, and maybe somebody's translated this.
This is Kappa. This text?
This text is so this right. This
there's
is
a translation by Rav Shilat.
Yes, so the one from Rav Shilat.
I have it. I think so.
You have it. So I assume
Shilat, yes.
They're using Rav Shilat on Al HaTorah. I'm not sure that they put all of it up yet, because I started using the Al HaTorah to prepare now for the shir. And it seemed to me that this is word for word Kapach's translation for this part. But I know that in many parts now of the Rambam, they have Rav Shilat's translation of the.
You see, this is quite a modern language, so you see that it's a translation. Yes. Although the Rambam writes, when he writes in Hebrew, it's also very nice the way.
Well, you know, of course, because the Hishpia Aleinu, right? The way the Rambam writes, ultimately had a direct effect on the reconstruction of the modern language.
The Yad HaChazaka is in Hebrew,
right?
Yes.
Right. I see. You know, I can tell you, like when you read, Agnon writes in a style that's reminiscent of Lashon HaMishnah, which is also the Rambam says he's writing in Lashon HaMishnah. It has the same kind of structure and cadence, and when you get now to much more modern writers, so now it's become more complex in many ways. But yes, so this translation, it's clearly a modern translation. And the earlier translations that go back, some of the Perushim Mishnayot and other things that the Rambam wrote in Arabic were translated.
Yes. But it's very hard to read the Tibunim.
Very hard. Yeah. Right. It's this kind of dense kind of classical Hebrew that we don't use. But also large parts of the Perusha Mishnah wasn't done by Ibn Tibim. It was done by other people, some of whom were not really great Talmidei Chachamim, some of whom didn't really understand the Rambam very well. And so there were many mistakes. And this is, Kapach talks a lot about this in his Hakdama. I assume the Rav Shilat also does. I don't have his Perush. I want to get it. But anyway, I'm going to go. I have to make a call. So, Chag Sameach to everybody. And I'll see you, God willing, in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Good night.
Chag Sameach, Chag Sameach.
Shia Tova.
Bye-bye.